Amanda here, and I'm sorry I didn't post yesterday. I had to go to the dentist and get a bunch of dental work done and stuff, but we are feeling good today. Anyways, I hope you guys are having a great October. We are halfway through 30 days of October since I didn't post yesterday. Shh, it's okay. But today I wanted to talk to you guys about H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I had always kind of attributed H.P. Lovecraft's writing to sci-fi mostly. And I guess that is true because a lot of his work does talk about reanimating corpses and things like that, which is sci-fi. However, I consider sci-fi being like aliens and monsters and things like that. So I really didn't know the extent of his horror work. Obviously, I've read some of his stories before, but I really focused this month, or the first half of this month, on just reading a ton of H.P. Lovecraft, and it is so horror, it's insane. So if you guys don't have an H.P. Lovecraft book, I highly suggest getting one. These are my top 5 favorite H.P. Lovecraft stories for now. I obviously have not read all of his stories, so keep that in mind. These are just of the ones that I have read. These are in no particular order, but I will tell you my top 1 or 2 favorites at the end. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Call of Cthulhu, because this I feel like is... Did you just hear my arm crack? This I feel like is kind of his most well-known story, we'll say. Okay, so this one was written in 1926. Now, I can't focus. I had a Coke, like a drink, like Coca-Cola, for the first time in I don't even know how long, and I'm kind of on a sugar high. Okay. Narrator finds notes of his uncle who has passed away, also with it's called a bas relief, which I'm like reading this and I'm like, what the fuck is a bas relief? And it's just kind of like a little idol, a little sculpture, just a little guy, okay? And it's weird. Okay. And he actually gives a description of it. Also, I will be reading you some of my favorite quotes, but I'm going to start just with the description of this bas relief. So the narrator describes it as an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, a pulpy tentacled head surrounded by a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. I also wanted to say too that a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, like, yes, he does get into the kind of gory details in some stories, but a lot of it he kind of leaves it up to your imagination, and I love writers who do that. Sometimes the scariest things are left unsaid, are left for our minds to kind of conjure up what that could look like, and I just love the way that he does that. So he gets this idol, and he learns that in 1908 a police officer found a similar idol looking through the swamps while they were raiding a cult. So they thought that it was a voodoo cult, but they said that it was more horrendous than any voodoo that they had ever seen. And some women and children went missing, and they found their bodies kind of being used in a ritualistic way with a bunch of men surrounding it, chanting in a different language, but it translates to in the house of... I don't know how to pronounce this. Maybe I should have looked this up. How to pronounce...
He gets very excited. A thing gluey, Magona Fa, Cthulhu relay, Wagana.
Okay, everyone needs to watch that video. That is by The Gentleman Gamer, and that was maybe the best video I've ever seen, but that's actually not what I was trying to find. Really, yeah. Okay, so that's the city that Cthulhu lives in. Oh, this video has just taken a turn, hasn't it? Okay, it says, in the house of Rilya, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming, which is a quote that's kind of used throughout this. This one's actually not a short story, it's a novella, so some of these are novellas, so keep that in mind as well. There's also talk of the Necronomicon in here, and within the Necronomicon it says, that is not dead which can eternal live, and with strange eons even death may die. So that's another quote from this, and that's like a famous H.P. Lovecraft quote as well. So we find that there are these different cults that kind of worship Cthulhu, and what they're trying to do is bring Cthulhu back to life. this man, the narrator, also finds that there was an account of a ship who actually went to uncharted territory and found this island. They actually went aboard, and one of the members actually opened this acre-wide door. Can I say actually anymore? Opened this huge door and saw Cthulhu. So he reads the journal of one of the, actually the only survivor. So they open this acre-wide door, Cthulhu emerges and goes after the people and after their ship. They somehow get away. However, even that man died because people who see him tend to die of madness. So now, looking back, the narrator thinks that he knows too much. He thinks that he's read too much about him, and he knows that these cults are still out there, and he fears that his life is in danger and that he'll end up dying too, because they seem to die under, curious circumstances. So let's read a few of my favorite quotes. I'm going to start with the very first paragraph, or the first few sentences of the paragraph. It says, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far." What an opening line, That line is so fantastic. Oh, okay, this line I love too. Okay, it says, "Only poetry or madness can do justice to the noises heard by Legrassi's men." Only through description of poetry or actually being there and witnessing like the madness that took place could you understand the intensity of what happened to those men. I just think that line is fantastic. That's the Call of Cthulhu. I really enjoyed this story. I think it's a great story. It's actually not my favorite H.P. Lovecraft story though, so let's move on. Next we're going to talk about In the Vault. This was written in 1925. So this story is kind of funny. There's a man named George Birch, and he's the undertaker for the town. However, the town calls him lax, insensitive, and professionally undesirable because he's working with the corpses and he just always makes mistakes and he messes up and he just doesn't really care about his work, has no work ethic really. So this story is really fun because it's kind of a story about revenge. So he gets trapped in this vault with the coffins, and he has 3 coffins in there. One with a boy that he really did like, one with a man that the town hated, so he spent even less time, working with the dead body and making a coffin. Like, he kind of half-assed everything because he didn't like the guy. He gets trapped in there. He finally escapes. However, his ankles are gnarled by one of the corpses, and it's just fun to figure out how it happened and who did it, and the story's just really fun, so I would highly suggest it. I don't really want to read it to you, but I really like the end line. It's, again, like a supernatural science fiction story, corpses coming to life, but the story was actually too gruesome to be published in Weird Tales at first, and then it was later published, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of that story. I really like this one. I thought it was so fun. This is one of my favorite stories for sure. Next up, let's talk about Herbert West Reanimator. So this was a serialized story, and it ran from February to July 1922 in Homebrew magazine. If you know that sounds familiar, it's because yes, the movie Reanimator was loosely based on this. I'm going to leave a little tab up here if you want to get more information on it. I did a video of Reanimator book versus movie, so you can check that out. Otherwise, I'm just going to give you another short synopsis. So here we have an unnamed narrator. This takes place in Miskatonic University. Our narrator talks about the disappearance of his friend Herbert West. Now, this story I really like. This is probably my favorite H.P. Lovecraft story ever. It's so fun. The only thing that I would say that I don't love about it is that it is, like I said, serialized, and at the start of every chapter you get kind of like a description of what happened before, which I understand for publishing in a magazine. However, as a reader just reading through, it is a little annoying, but still I love this story so much. So we find out that Herbert West has disappeared, and it's kind of his friend's account on their journey through life. The movie takes place over, I think, like a few months, but the story takes place over years and years. So we really get to know Herbert West, we really get to know the narrator, and they go on this crazy journey where Herbert West has the idea that he can reanimate corpses. So they start grave digging, and then they need corpses that are more fresh. So it turns out that Herbert West actually ends up killing people, which the narrator supposedly is not interested in doing. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So it talks about inhumane screams from the people who were reanimated. There are bodies missing after they reanimate them. They just seem to disappear. There are killings in town after these people disappear. There's also talk of reanimating decapitated bodies. I mean, this story is probably the gnarliest as far as it goes. This one's it gets pretty bloody. After we find out all this information, and trust me, like, you gotta read the story yourself if you're interested at all all in Reanimator because it is such a fantastic story, and I'm just giving you a really small breakdown. But after all this happens, they end up, you know, joining the war so that they can start reanimating pieces of bodies. Like, it's a messed up story. And at the very end, the corpses actually come back and they break through the wall in like a cellar and they kill Herbert West. However, when the unnamed narrator goes to the police don't believe him because there's no hole in the cellar. So I have a bit of a theory on this. First, let me read you a few quotes. So this is the very first line. It says, "Of Herbert West, who was my friend in college and in afterlife, I can speak only with extreme terror. I was his assistant and helped him make all decisions, not only concerning the source of bodies, but concerning a suitable place for our lonesome work." And he also calls them their trophies. That's the narrator's word, not Herbert West's. So then it kind of changes. So at first he's all on board, and then it kind of changes, and he says, "My attitude towards him had been largely one of fascinated admiration, but as his boldness and methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I did not like the way he looked at healthy living bodies." Okay? Then the next line he says, in a page over, "I became acutely afraid of West, for he began to look at me that way." So it's kind of interesting that he's along with Herbert West in collecting bodies. He finds out that he kills them and he still sticks by his side. He's okay with the experiments. He goes along with him wherever he goes. But then when Herbert West looks at him that way, then it becomes a problem. So kind of my theory is that, well, I mean, it leaves a lot for the interpretation of the reader, right? Did Herbert West really get attacked and killed by these zombies? Or did this unnamed narrator kill him? I don't know. You know, and he releases all of this information where the cops just think he's crazy and he gets to go on living his life, and now he doesn't have to worry about the fear of Herbert West turning on him because he's already turned on Herbert West. I don't know. Really interesting story. Highly suggest you check it out, but there's also a few other lines that I wanted to read. Oh, this one's just funny. "The hot summer air does not favor corpses." Oh, okay, so this is at the door, a little kid went missing, and then one of their reanimated corpses shows up at the door, and it says, "And having between its glistening teeth a snow-white, terrible, cylindrical object terminating in a tiny hand." He has the little kid's hand in his mouth as he shows up at the door. So this story is pretty twisted. "I shuddered when he finished severing the head, placed it in the hellish vat of a pulpy reptile tissue to prevent it for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table." And I may have read some of these in the other video too, so I apologize for that. At the end, when it talks about the humans that have shown, or the corpses that have shown up to kill them, it says, "Their outlines were human, semi-human, fractionally human, and not human at all." I love that line so much. It's so good. So that's Reanimator. Again, it's kind of like the movie, but it delves definitely a lot more into Herbert West's madness and the narrator's madness too, because they definitely go hand in hand, and it's much different than the actual film of it. So highly suggest you guys read this one if you haven't. And let's move on to the next story. Now we're going to be talking about Cool Air. This is written in 1926, and this one's really fun. So again, we have this unnamed narrator, and he first talks about how he hates the draft of cool air, and then he goes on to explain why this is the most horrible thing ever. So he's staying in an apartment building in New York, and his roof starts leaking ammonia. So he goes to the landlady, and the landlady says, "Oh, there's this doctor upstairs, blah, blah, blah. He's crazy. I'll fix it. I'll figure it out." So one night the narrator realizes he's having a heart attack, and he runs upstairs to the doctor's house, who we find is Dr. Munoz. And the doctor cares for him, saves his life, and he feels very grateful, so he starts visiting the doctor on a regular basis. Even though the conversations start to take kind of a weird turn, he doesn't really accept the idea of death, and he mentions a few weird things. The narrator feels pretty uncomfortable, but he doesn't want to stop going because he feels like he owes this man, really his life. The narrator learns that he keeps his apartment at 56 degrees, and he uses an ammonia-based refrigeration system to do it. Well, one day the pump ends up breaking, so he is frantic, freaking out. His mood changes, like his entire persona changes. So this narrator ends up going out and keeps buying him ice to stay in a bath to keep his body cold. And then he hires someone to go and get the ice so he can go and meet with a mechanic who can come and fix the pump. Well, it happens a little too late. He keeps running into issues, and he ends up finding the doctor's body decomposing. And he reads in a letter that the doctor has actually been dead for 18 years. and he just refuses to die. So this is just another fun story, again, about reanimated corpses. It's just a fun little short story to read in October. Creeps you out a little bit, and it's just fun. The last story I want to talk about today is called The Lurking Fear. This one I like a lot as well. This was, again, a serialized story running from January to April in 1923, again for Homebrew Magazine, just as Reanimator was. This one, though, we don't have any of those annoying recaps. It's just kind of a more fluid story, so I appreciate that a lot more. But again, we have a narrator who's a reporter and kind of like a monster hunter, and he learns that there's a town that's been devastated by this big thunderstorm. However, they think something else is lurking there. So he goes and meets with the residents of the town, and they kind of blame it all on this Martense manor. And they talk about all of these myths surrounding the manor. So him and two of his friends go in, stay the night at this manor. Are manors and mansions the same thing? Okay, well anyways, they stay at this mansion, and they end up falling asleep, and he wakes up to both of his friends on either side of him gone, disappeared. So he is very confused as to how that happened and why he wasn't targeted. There's a big thunderstorm that rolls in. On that same night, after his friends disappear, he sees this big demonic shadow on the wall. So the narrator meets with another reporter. They both decide to go to the town. However, they're trapped by another thunderstorm and they're stuck in a cabin. The other individual gets his face mangled by an unseen force, which I'll read a quote from that in a minute. Then we kind of learn the history of the mansion, the family that lived there, and how they were kind of weird and they hated all outside people. There is one person in particular named Jan Martens, and he actually went and joined the war and came back, and when he came back, the family just kind of disowned him because he had not kind of shunned everyone else like the family had, so they ended up murdering him. And after that, the entire town was just like, okay, we're done with these people, they're crazy. And then the family disappeared completely. They had a hereditary, I guess, mutation, but I don't know that it's a mutation. I don't know, for lack of better words, I'm just going to say mutation, of one eye a different color. So one eye brown and one eye blue. The narrator, after his other friend gets killed, he's like, all right, I'm digging up Jan's body because his idea is that Jan's spirit is haunting the place because he was murdered by his family. He's like, if I dig up his corpse, his spirit will be free and then we'll be done with this. But he digs up his corpse and finds a burrow. He climbs in the burrow and sees this like goblin creature. He's saved from that creature, but then he realizes, oh my gosh, there are mounds all over this hill. There are probably more down there. So he goes in and finds like hundreds of these demonic looking goblin creatures. It's kind of like The Hills Have Eyes a little bit. And he finds that the monsters are actually the Martens family, who have just inbred for centuries in the darkness and have turned into these monsters. And the reason he knows that is because of the eyes. So one eye is always brown and one eye is always blue. He decides to blow the place up, but then after that he can't really stop thinking about it because he's worried that one of the Martens creatures has survived. So let me read you a few quotes from this. In this one, the narrator just said, "For I am a connoisseur in horrors." And really, all I ever want in life is to just be a connoisseur of horrors. I thought that was such a great line. Then we have this line, and it says, "And be the demon's solid entity or vaporous pestilence, I must see it." I just love that line too. And then 231, this is my favorite line that I have maybe ever read ever. It says, "At the same time, the wolfish wind rose to demonic crescendos of ululation." What? Demonic crescendos of ululation. That is maybe the most perfect line ever written. Line. But I think that is maybe one of the best lines ever written. It's my favorite line that I've read so far in this book. So those are my 5 favorite H.P. Lovecraft books, stories, novellas, whatever you want to call them. Highly, 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 highly suggest that you pick up an H.P. Lovecraft book, or if you have one at home, to crack it open this fall, because I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. There's something for everyone. You know, we've got monsters, we've got corpses, we've got revenge stories, we've got so many different things. So it's just it's a really fun read. Really, I've loved everything that I've read so far, and I've enjoyed tons of stories that I haven't involved in this video, but I figured it would be best to pick my 5 favorite, because I get really too excited when I talk about horror and then I just ramble on and everybody's like, "Hey, shut the fuck up." And I'm like, okay, I'll try. But I never do. Anyways, I just wanted to bring you my 5 favorite stories. So that is it for the video today. So thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you tomorrow with yet another horror video. Bye, guys.